Hey guys, tonight we drift into the candlelit shadows of a medieval abbey, where stained glass halos flicker across stone floors and the scent of rosemary and damp parchment curls in the air. You're standing at the edge of a vision, one that begins not in fire or thunder, but in the soft breath of a sickly child, born into a world where silence is holy, and women's voices are usually left to echo in kitchens or cloisters. Except tonight's woman is different, and this story, you probably won't survive it. Not without questioning your own dreams or your next cup of herbal tea. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. You never know, someone across the world might be falling asleep beside the same stars. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in the year 1098 in Bermersheim, somewhere in the folds of the Rhineland. It's not a glamorous birth. No royal tapestries, no choir of doves. Just the 10th child of a noble family that doesn't have the coin to keep 10 noble children. So when you start seeing colors where there shouldn't be, or lights dancing in the sky that no one else can spot, you stay quiet. Mostly because you're scared, and partly because your mother tells you not to be dramatic. But the visions don't go away. They visit when you pray, when you cry, when you try to sleep but can't, because your body aches in ways no one understands. You're smart, but your world is small. You can't read yet, but you're already carrying whole mythologies in your head, woven out of stars, fever dreams, and candlelight. By 8, your parents make a decision that feels like love, or maybe surrender. They offer you to the church. Now this isn't just Sunday school and biscuits. You're literally handed over to a woman named Jutta, a noblewoman turned anchoress who's already sealed herself into a monastic stone cell beside the Benedictine monastery of Disibodenberg. Think of a small chapel without an exit. That's your new life. Walls, prayers, and silence. They call it enclosure. You call it lonely. Your days blur into each other, chanting psalms, memorizing prayers, learning the rhythms of monastic life. No makeup, no mirrors, no shoes worth writing about. But something strange happens. You begin to hear the silence, not just the absence of noise, but the presence of something vast, something ancient, something that hums beneath the surface of the world like a second heartbeat. And sometimes it speaks to you. You don't tell anyone, not yet, but you write it down in your mind, if not yet on parchment. You imagine words as seeds. If you say them too early, they might wither. So you keep them safe. You let them bloom in secret. Mainstream historical fact, Hildegard of Bingen claimed she began receiving visions from a very early age. Visions that continued throughout her life, guiding her spiritual and creative work. Many believe these experiences were rooted in migraines, epilepsy, or some other neurological condition. Quirky detail. Her name Hildegard literally means battle enclosure, which is either perfect irony or perfect foreshadowing. You decide. And historians still argue whether her early visions were truly mystical or simply symptoms misunderstood by a deeply religious age. But here's the thing, Hildegard never seemed confused about them. She knew what she saw, and she never once called it madness. By the time Jutta dies years later, you're no longer just the weird girl with the quiet voice. You're a woman grown cloaked in black wool and authority. And while others weep at Jutta's bier, you stare into the candlelight and feel something shift. A voice inside says, "Write what you see." You hesitate, because you're not a priest, you're not a scholar, you're not even officially allowed to teach. But that voice, the same one that's been singing behind your eyes since you were a child, will not be quiet. So you whisper back, "Yes." The next morning you wake before dawn. The sky is still purple and bruised with stars. You walk the cloister barefoot, breath ghosting in front of you, and begin to shape a future no one saw coming. Not even you. You sit in your cell back straight, despite the stone floor pressing its memory into your spine. There's a wax tablet balanced on your knee, and in your hand, a stylus trembling ever so slightly. You stare ahead, but not at the wall. Through it, past it, into that place behind your eyelids where colors have always burned brighter than logic. You begin to write. You're not just writing what you remember, you're writing what you see as you see it. A mandala of fire encircling a figure of light, a vast wheel of spinning eyes, a tower rising through the heavens wrapped in vines of golden breath. It's not theology as you were taught it. It's something else, something fuller, fiercer, more alive. You call it Scivias. Know the ways. Not a catchy bestseller title, but hey, it's the 12th century, you work with what you've got. The thing is, visions are dangerous currency. If you're a man, you might be called a prophet, a saint, a reformer. If you're a woman, you're much more likely to be called heretic, or hysteric, or both. So, you hedge your bets. You send a sample of your writings to Bernard of Clairvaux. Yes, that Bernard, superstar of the Cistercians preacher of the Second Crusade, the man who has Pope Eugene III on speed prayer. You don't expect a reply. You're a nun, a woman, a vision weaver. You might as well be sending dreams in a bottle. And yet, he writes back. Not only that he's intrigued, suddenly, people start to take you seriously. There are whispers in the monastery courtyard, not of madness, but of mysticism. Your visions are declared legitimate by a pope. Yes, Pope Eugene himself reads from Scivias during a synod. Imagine that. Your dreamscapes performed like theater beneath vaulted ceilings and torchlight. Mainstream historical fact, Pope Eugene III authorized Hildegard's visionary writing after hearing excerpts read aloud during the Synod of Trier in 1147-1148. This papal blessing gave her work credibility and, more importantly, protection in a male-dominated religious world. Still, you hesitate. You're not eager for the spotlight. You'd rather chant psalms in your cell and grind herbs into healing balms. But the voice, the same one that's always spoken in heat and rhythm, keeps pressing, hey, go, speak, hey, sing. And so you do. You begin composing music, not just chants, but symphonies of the soul, as you'll later describe them, melodies that soar where monks' chants trudge. You write dozens, 77 known pieces in total, that break the rules and somehow still deepen the sacred. Some say your notes sound like birds teaching angels to breathe. Okay, you don't say that, but someone will. Eventually, quirky detail. You invent your own language, lingua ignota, the unknown language, a strange private vocabulary of over 1,000 words used in your prayers and poetry, not meant to replace Latin or German, but to speak to the divine in a tongue untainted by everyday speech. Some of the words are oddly beautiful loyful, for people puries, for Father Hiltspur is for God. It's basically spiritual Elvish, and historians still argue whether lingua ignota was a sacred code or a creative flourish, an early glossolalia, or simply Hildegard's way of expressing the inexpressible. Either way, it's not gibberish. It's a bridge between what is and what longs to be said. Your reputation begins to swell like a chant at dusk. People come. Not just monks and scribes, but laywomen, noblemen, beggars, bishops. They come limping and leaning and longing. They want to hear the woman who sees the invisible, who sings the unspeakable, who writes visions with the confidence of a bishop and the fire of a prophet. You heal them. Not always their bodies, but sometimes their fears. You mix herbs with honey and prayer, and you offer advice that walks the line between medical and mystical. You talk about the four humors, yes, still trendy, but you also talk about the greening power of nature. You call it viriditas, that lush spiritual vitality that runs through sap and soul alike. You begin to realize you're not just a visionary, you're a healer, a teacher, a composer, a writer, a rebel in wool robes. The church starts to get a little nervous, not because of what you're doing, but because of what you might do next. So what do you do next? You build your own convent, because of course you do. You stand at the edge of the mountaintop wind, tugging your veil like a restless child, and stare at the rough slope that will soon cradle your dream. There's no building here yet, just trees and sky, and the broad green hush of Rupertsberg, a spit of land near Bingen, between river and forest, between solitude and song. But you can see it. You've seen it actually more than once. In dreams in prayer, in the hot humming clarity that fills you when you let your breath sink deep enough to feel divine purpose curl behind your ribs. You've decided this is where you'll move your sisters. Not everyone's thrilled. The monks at Dizzy-Bodenberg, your current home, aren't exactly shouting, "Go, girl." They're hesitant to let you go, and even more hesitant to let you take half the convent's labor force talent pool and herbal supply chain with you. Can't imagine why. Still you push, literally. When they stall, delay, refuse, you fall into a deep, debilitating illness. Bedridden, breathless. Your limbs feel like lead. The message is clear to you, at least you are not meant to stay, and your body is done negotiating. Eventually, they cave. Whether out of faith or fatigue, they give you permission. And once you have it, you heal, just like that. And rise. Mainstream historical fact. Hildegard of Bingen famously suffered a mysterious illness when denied permission to found a new convent at Rupertsberg. When permission was granted, she reportedly recovered quickly, an episode many saw as divine confirmation of her calling. So, you move. You pack your scrolls, your seeds, your sisters. You kiss the cool walls of Dizzy-Bodenberg farewell and walk towards something you've only ever glimpsed in visions. At Rupertsberg, the work is physical. Building, clearing land, organizing supplies, designing space, not just for prayer but for growing things, because your new convent will be a garden, a sanctuary, a place where nuns don't just chant, they study, they heal, they sing. You're not running away from the church. You're expanding it, one herb-scented prayer at a time. Soon, women arrive. Not just the ones who followed you from Dizzy-Bodenberg, but new ones. Daughters of nobility, widows with silver hair and sharp minds, girls whose families want them cloistered somewhere respectable, and who will find themselves growing into something far less passive than expected. You teach them, not just scripture and psalms, but medicine, music, observation, language, healing. You teach them that God doesn't only live in incense and chalices, but in the waxy curve of a violet leaf, in the scent of rain on rosemary, in the soft clink of pestle against mortar. Quirky detail. You design your convent with spaces for herb gardens, quiet reading, and even communal baths fed by hot spring runoff, a medieval spa. Not quite, but you believe in caring for the body and the soul. Clean skin, clear mind, deeper prayer. You write too. So much writing, medical treatises, philosophical texts, letters, hundreds of them, to emperors, abbots, mystics, and popes. You do not shy away from calling out bad behavior. In fact, you kind of lean into it. You tell Frederick Barbarossa to knock off the power games. You scold clergy for corruption. You warn bishops that the soul rots from silence. Historians still argue whether your letters were truly as bold as they read today, or if scribes later amplified your voice. But either way, one thing's clear: you had a voice. And you used it. You're not always easy to live with. Let's be honest. You demand discipline. You expect clarity. You require that your sisters sing with full voice, even if the notes are strange. You believe in hard work, in sacred structure, enjoy earned, not assumed. But you also laugh easily. You eat figs with your hands. You sneak out to the garden barefoot when the moon is full. You believe God loves beauty. Why else would roses smell like that? Your music becomes a kind of prayer that catches on. It isn't Gregorian chant. It's freer, looser, with leaps and lifts that feel like flying. Your nuns sing it in unison, and it echoes through the cloisters like liquid light. Some call it too emotional, too feminine, too new. You don't care, because to you, that's the point. There's divinity in the daring. Soon, your reputation spreads again. People don't just send letters. They come in person, to hear you speak, to seek your counsel, to be healed by your salves, your songs, your visions. Not everyone approves. The church has always had a complicated relationship with women who lead, especially ones who write their own liturgy, who publish theological treatises, who refuse to keep their revelations quietly tucked behind a grill. You're challenged, questioned, poked by suspicion. But every time you answer with clarity, with scripture, with dreams that unfold like flower petals made of fire, you've made yourself hard to dismiss. You've made Rupertsburg into a living manuscript, a place where women can write their own verses into the margins of a world that mostly tried to silence them. And now you're beginning to think it's time to take the show on the road, because you've been called to preach, which is, let's say, unorthodox, and absolutely against canon law, and exactly what you're about to do next. You're not supposed to be doing this. Really. Preaching outside a cloister, delivering sermons to mixed audiences, traveling town to town with your voice rising above cathedral pews and open market squares, that's a man's job. By law, by custom. By roughly 8 centuries of pleas, stay quietly in the background, ma'am. But you're Hildegard of Bingen, and something in you refuses to shrink. So, you go. At first, it's just letters, bold ones, sure, but still parchment and ink. Advice to bishops, warnings to emperors, instructions to wayward clergy that somehow manage to sound both poetic and terrifying. Then come the invitations, some genuine, some cautious, some simply curious. What exactly does this visionary nun want to say? You say yes. You pack your manuscripts, your herbal satchels, your portable lectern, and head out into the world like a storm disguised as a pilgrim. Mainstream historical fact. Between 1160 and 1170, Hildegard traveled extensively across the German-speaking world, preaching to both clergy and laity, an extraordinary act for a woman of her time. She delivered public sermons and advocated for reform in monasteries and abbeys. You're not subtle. Your sermons are fierce, vivid, uncompromising. You talk about the corruption of the church, the failures of bishops, the moral decay of the empire. You compare spiritual apathy to mold. You call out leaders who treat their power like wine, indulgent, staining, and addictive. People come to listen. Not just women, not just nuns, but merchants, nobles, peasants, monks. They sit beneath vaulted arches and stormy skies, wrapped in cloaks, breath steaming in the cold hearts, quietly cracking open. They say your voice doesn't sound like thunder. It sounds like light. You call it Viridita's greenness. That sacred vitality that pulses through all living things. It's a word you love because it doesn't just mean alive. It means divinely alive, full of sap, full of surge, full of that holy yes. You say the soul has seasons. That despair is a kind of drought, and that God doesn't want wilted prayers, He wants blooming ones. Your language is strange to some, mystical, metaphorical, a swirl of vision and nature and gospel. But it lands, because truth delivered in poetry still hits like a hammer. Quirky detail. Some accounts say you traveled with an entourage of women who sang your music before you preached. like an opening act of luminous sound, not hymns of sorrow, but fierce bright chants that soared up stone walls and shook dust loose from stained glass. You preach at Cologne, then Trier, then Metz, each city different, each crowd bigger. You don't tone it down. You don't soften your vision to make it easier to swallow. You tell men to repent. You tell women to rise. You say things like, the soul must be awakened by the wound of love, and somehow even the grumpy theologians write that one down. Of course, not everyone's cheering. Some clergy whisper about heresy, about dangerous emotion, about visions that feel too vivid, too bodily, too feminine. Historians still argue whether your visions were literal divine messages or expressions of a rare neurological condition, possibly migraines with aura, or even temporal lobe epilepsy. But no matter how they started, they became real through what you did with them. And what you did, you turned them into Scripture's echo, into sermons of smoke and sunlight. You didn't just quote God, you sounded like Him. People brought you their wounded, not just in body, but in spirit, in marriage, in memory. You wrote letters that read like therapy 3 centuries early. You counseled women whose husbands beat them. You advised monks racked with lust. You soothed nobles haunted by battle. You answered them all with metaphors, with herbal remedies, with visions of fire and grace. You weren't trying to replace the church. You were trying to remind it that theology isn't just law and Latin. It's music and medicine and the way someone arranges their bread and honey in the morning. And through it all, you kept writing. Books that wove the spiritual with the natural, that spoke of stars and seeds and the ways they mirror the body. You described the cosmos like a cathedral with angels as its beams and the soul as its altar. You didn't draw lines between science and faith. You danced on them. People call your works prophetic. Some call them confusing, but no one calls them forgettable. One night you dream of a fiery tower crumbling into gold dust. You wake with the image still on your tongue. You interpret it as a warning that earthly power, when unrooted from virtue, collapses into itself. You write it down. You whisper it in your next sermon. The empire listens, because by now you've become more than a nun with visions. You're a mirror. People look at you and see what they need. A healer, a prophet, a teacher, a challenge, a balm. You miss your herbs, though. The rush of mint under your nails. The quiet patience of infusing oil with marigold and thyme. The slow science of turning flour into salve seed into sip. Preaching stirs your mind, but medicine feeds your hands. So between journeys you return to Rupertsberg. You gather your apprentices. You write again. And when winter deepens, you settle into the work of your next great manuscript. It won't be a vision or a sermon. It will be a body and how to heal it. You roll up your sleeves, literally, because the work ahead isn't dreamy or symbolic. It's physical, messy, rooted in mortar bowls and bitter roots, and the very real problem of someone not being able to digest lentils without profound regret. You're writing a medical compendium, and not a dainty one, not a vague collection of perhaps try herbs for that observations. You go full force. Descriptions, diagnoses, treatments, recipes, remedies, a sort of 12th century WebMD, if WebMD smelled like rosemary and took its spiritual advice from visions of burning skies. Mainstream historical fact, Hildegard of Bingen authored 2 significant medical texts, Physica Natural History and Causae et Curae, Causes and Cures. The first cataloged the properties of plants, animals, stones, and metals. The second examined disease psychology and holistic remedies. You don't just list symptoms. You tell stories about them. You explain how sadness moves through the body like fog through a valley. You describe the liver as a restless animal, the blood as a garden. You chart humors and temperaments, not in sterile graphs, but in metaphors that make people lean closer. You talk about fevers and melancholy digestion and sleep. And yes, you have opinions. So many opinions. You think fennel is basically the Beyoncé of herbs. Good for digestion, eyesight, mood, breath. You love galangal root and elderflower, and anything that smells like it remembers sunshine. You also recommend unusual things. Quirky detail. You suggest that women who suffer from menstrual cramps should roast a lamb's womb, mix it with wine, and consume it warm. Which, thank you, Hildegard. We'll keep that in the historical curiosity file. You say crushed oyster shells can calm a troubled heart. You say sapphire dust, mixed with milk, can cleanse a fogged mind. You say bear fat should be applied to joints. People listen. Not because they always agree, but because you mean it. And your herbal knowledge isn't floating in a vacuum. You've learned from folk traditions from earlier Roman and Greek writers, from conversations with other monastics, from your own experiments. You walk the gardens. You touch the soil. You press leaves between parchment and thumb. And when someone collapses in the abbey from a cough that won't quit, you are the one they call. Not the bishop. Not the physician. You. Your treatments aren't just medicinal. They're musical. You talk about harmony in the body the same way you do in chant. When bile overwhelms, it's a disharmony. When the heart races without cause, it's dissonance. You restore rhythm with poultices and prayer alike. You write that some illnesses begin in the soul, not because you're blaming anyone, but because you see how worry weaves its way into the belly, how sorrow stiffens the joints, how anger can curdle the blood faster than spoiled butter. You prescribe chamomile for sadness. You recommend song for grief. You suggest long walks with warm water and a confession at sunset. You say the divine lives not just in heaven, but in every pore. And you practice what you preach. Your day is balanced study. Healing prayer music, a bit of honey on bread, and then back to the scriptorium to explain how nettle root can aid with swelling. Your manuscript Physica categorizes everything from apples to antelopes. Your entry on the eagle suggests it can rejuvenate its own youth by flying into the sun. Your entry on strawberries warns they may carry impurities because they grow close to the ground. A fancy medieval way of saying, wash your fruit, please. Historians still argue whether you compiled your works directly or dictated them to scribes, and whether every remedy came from first-hand experience or collected sources. But what's clear? The voice is yours. And that voice is confident, grounded, and weirdly specific. You aren't scared of bodies. You aren't scared of their fluids, their heat, their hungers. You don't think flesh makes you lesser. You think flesh is where spirit lives. And so, you write for it. You write through it. Your medical texts gain attention not as oddities, but as serious contributions to a world still defining what medicine even means. And for you, medicine is inseparable from creation. You talk about nature as God's second scripture. You say the sun has its own pulse. You say the moon shapes the fluids in our bodies, just like it does the tides. You recommend sleeping with the window cracked. Fresh air is divine after all. You write about how women's bodies change with the seasons, how they move in curves and crescents, how herbs need to be gathered at dawn when the light still remembers the dark. You are in some ways the first naturopath, but you are not anti-science. You just think science needs a little soul. And in your abbey, both thrive. Your garden flourishes. Visitors arrive not just for spiritual guidance, but to ask what to do about their joints, their fevers, their children's coughs. You give them vials of thyme syrup. You tell them to pray while stirring. You ask them what they've eaten. You're not always correct. Medicine evolves, of course, but you are careful, observant, experimental, and maybe most of all you listen. You listen to the plants, to the breath, to the ways a person speaks before they even open their mouth. You say healing is not just curing, it's restoring someone to their rhythm, to their viriditas. That divine greening, that sacred yes. And as the seasons shift again, and your garden glows with marigold and sage, you begin to feel something new taking root in your chest. Not illness, not fear, but legacy. Something wants to be written, not about medicine, not about visions, something melodic. You close your herb book, you reach for a clean parchment, and just like that, the first note appears. You hum before you write, not because you're unsure of the words, but because the music arrives first, always. It floats through your chest like a bird that remembers its home mid-flight. Then the syllables fall in behind it like respectful pilgrims. You are writing a song. No, wait. You are writing songs. Dozens. Some come easy, slipping from your tongue like spring water over stones. Others make you wrestle. You pace the cloisters. You stare at fig trees. You chew fennel seeds and frown at the sky until the rhythm lands just right. This isn't your first foray into music. You've been composing for years. But now it's different. Now the songs want to be born. You dip your quill and begin to build them. Not just melody, not just lyrics, but architecture. Music as vision. Music as medicine. Music as revelation in chant form. Mainstream historical fact, Hildegard of Bingen composed over 70 liturgical songs, now collectively known as the Symphonia Harmonia Celestium Revelationum, Symphony of the Harmony of Celestial Revelations. Many of her compositions feature soaring complex melodic lines unlike anything composed by her male contemporaries. That's the thing. You don't write like the men do. Their chants are low predictable like prayers humming beneath stone. Yours leap. They stretch upward. They climb like vines toward sunlight. You write in modes that spiral and shimmer. You layer language so densely with imagery that singers sometimes pause halfway through to ask, did you really mean to say, gleaming dawn-rooted radiance of the Creator's womb? Yes. Yes, you did. You write not to be vague, but to be vast. Every note is a star, every phrase a constellation. You write about creation as a kind of divine music, about the Virgin Mary as a vessel so pure she hums with the memory of heaven. You write about cosmic harmony, holy fire, the greening power of God's breath. You write like a woman possessed by beauty, and maybe you are. Quirky detail. You once composed an entire morality play, Ordo Virtutum, where personified virtues sing, but the devil can only yell or grunt. Why? Because evil lacks melody. It has no harmony. It cannot create, only distort. It's theater, yes, but it's also theology, with costumes. Sometimes your sisters perform it in the courtyard. You stand back half-hidden, smiling behind your sleeve, as humility outsings arrogance with a single sustained note. Scholars still argue whether you had formal musical training, or whether your compositions were dictated during visions, or simply constructed through intuition and divine trust. But no one denies their power. Your melodies feel alive. They feel like they were written by someone who heard thunder speak and decided to answer. And maybe that's true. Because for you, sound is healing. You prescribe music to the sick, not just as a distraction but as medicine. You believe melody reorders. The blood restores the mind, soothes the breath. You say we are bodies of sound. You say the soul is tuned like a harp, and sin knocks it out of pitch. You say music can retune us gently, lovingly, until we sing with the stars again. You write songs for feast days, for prayers, for processions, for grief. You compose for the Virgin Mary, like she's both mother and fire. You compose for saints, like they're your old neighbors. And sometimes, you compose just because the sky turned pink in a certain way, and your heart couldn't stay quiet. There's one chant, O vis eternitatis, that opens like a sunrise. long, slow, radiant. You sing it at dawn with the sisters, your voices floating upward through the chapel, like bee song through a vaulted hive. There's another Columba aspexit dedicated to Saint Maximinus, with lines that twist and reach like ivy climbing holy ruins. They're not easy to sing. Even today, choirs that tackle your work have to breathe differently. Your lines are long, soaring, defiantly feminine. They ask the singer to become a vessel, not just for tone, but for trust. You are writing music that believes in light, and your sisters, they love it. They say your songs make their prayers feel real. They say your melodies remind them that God has a garden, and we are the flowers. You teach them gently. You rehearse barefoot. You let mistakes happen, then laugh them away. Because this isn't about performance. It's about participation. It's about remembering that we were made for beauty, not in spite of hardship, but because of it. Your choir grows strong. Visitors come to hear the singing and leave in tears. Some call it miraculous. You just shrug and say creation sings too. I'm just trying to keep up. You never call yourself a composer. You never call yourself anything really. But others start to. They call you Sibyl of the Rhine. They call you prophetess. They call you doctor of songs. Some of these titles make you itch a little. Too fancy. You're still the woman who grinds herbs in the morning and hands out cough syrup with a smile. But you accept the praise, not because you believe you earned it, but because it might help the next woman who hears music in her chest and wonders if that's allowed. Spoiler, it is. And the music doesn't stop. It keeps coming. Even when your hands ache. Even when your eyes blur. Even when the parchment seems to shimmer like water and the ink won't dry just right. Still you write. You write like the sun depends on it, because maybe it does. And when you hear your sisters' voices rise in harmony, when you feel the chapel walls pulse with melody, when you see a stranger's shoulders lower in relief halfway through the third stanza, you know, you're not just feeding souls, you're waking them. And the world is listening. The letters are piling up. Wax seals broken, edges curled from travel. Some come smudged with foreign dust. Others smell faintly of ink and rain and urgency. And nearly all of them begin the same way, O wise and venerable Lady Hildegard. You raise an eyebrow every time. You never asked to be anyone's oracle. But now it seems your visions and your voice have started to echo far beyond the cloister walls. Bishops write. Abbesses plead. Even emperors start sniffing around. They want your advice, your blessings, your approval, your corrections sometimes, though they rarely admit it that way. You read every letter. Some make you smile, some make you groan, and a few spark the fire that's always been flickering in your ribs. Because here's the thing, your visions aren't just about light and lilies. They're about justice, order, the deep divine harmony that governs everything from planets to parsley. And when that harmony gets ignored, when the powerful abuse the weak, when greed strangles generosity, when leaders grow fat while children go hungry, you feel it in your bones, and you write back with heat. Mainstream historical fact. Hildegard corresponded with over 300 individuals during her lifetime, including Pope Eugene III, Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, Bernard of Clairvaux, and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Her letters blend mysticism, moral rebuke, and sharp political commentary, always cloaked in spiritual authority. You write to emperors like they're unruly students. You scold bishops for laziness. You warn monks against pride, vanity, and letting their wine supplies grow too generous. You tell one abbot to stop hoarding silver, and another to stop pretending he's holier than his cook. But always with the voice of the visions. You don't scream. You shine. God says you begin, and suddenly your words land like thunder wrapped in roses. And yes, they listen. mostly. Sometimes they nod, then keep doing whatever they were doing. But other times you see the change, the humility, the course correction. And that's why you keep writing. Quirky detail. There's one noblewoman who keeps asking you about the end times. She's obsessed. You write her back gently, but eventually suggest she focus less on doomsday and more on feeding her neighbors. You aren't here to inspire fear. You're here to ignite conscience. You believe the soul is like a candle meant to burn, not sputter. So when you hear that a monastery is collapsing under infighting, you send a letter full of metaphorical fire. When a town accuses a woman of witchcraft for simply knowing how to dry herbs, you write a furious defense cloaked in scriptural imagery. When the church grows too soft on sin or too cruel on control, you remind them the breath of God is green, not gray. Scholars still argue whether you were truly a feminist by today's terms, whether your assertiveness was strategic submission, cloaked in holy language, or genuine spiritual command. But they all agree you held power in a world that rarely handed it to women. You earned it by listening to visions and repeating them with clarity. And when men scoffed, you didn't fight. You sang. You didn't curse. You wrote, and the world responded. Even the Pope eventually called you the Sibyl of the Rhine. You still chuckle at that one. Still your influence grows. The sisters in your abbey now number in the dozens. Some come as children already wide-eyed. Others arrive as women battered by the world and seeking refuge. You welcome all, and you teach them, not just how to pray, but how to notice, how to observe the stars, how to prepare a tincture, how to write with precision and argue with grace and sing from the diaphragm like God is listening, and He is. You give them tools, not just rules, and they flourish. They're not just nuns. They're healers, scribes, composers, librarians, linguists, beekeepers, gardeners. Every morning the abbey hums like a hive, pages turning kettles, clinking birdsong mingling with chant. It's a kind of holy noise, and when visitors arrive, bishops, merchants, the occasional curious noblewoman, you invite them in with tea and melody and very little tolerance for pretense. One archbishop tries to lecture you on theology. You quote him back to himself, then improve the argument. He leaves pale and polite. The abbey giggles for days. You aren't trying to build a legacy. You're just trying to build a haven, a place where truth feels safe, a place where learning is as natural as breathing, a place where the divine doesn't feel distant. It feels like the echo in your own chest. And the letters keep coming. More questions, more fears, more admiration disguised as inquiry. You start to wonder if you'll ever catch up. But then one evening, just as the light turns amber, you sit in the scriptorium surrounded by inkpots and lullabies. You dip your quill, and you begin again. Because words are bridges. Because music is medicine. Because when the world trembles, someone has to sing. And why not you? The garden has changed since you first stepped into it. The same stone walls, the same winding paths, but now more color, more intention. The beds have expanded. The labels are clearer. The sisters know not just what to plant, but why. You sit beneath a pear tree, its branches heavy with the season's promise, and sip something bitter and green from a clay cup. It tastes like rosemary lemon balm and just a whisper of wild mint, the kind of drink that clears your mind without asking for attention. You feel your age now, in your knees, in your spine, but not in your voice. That still rings clear. Today is a teaching day. A group of sisters kneel nearby, gathering comfrey leaves and humming one of the simpler antiphons. You taught it to them last year when the fevers came through the valley. Music, you told them, carries more than comfort. It carries memory and medicine. Because herbs are good, but songs linger. Mainstream historical fact, Hildegard of Bingen, composed dozens of liturgical songs and chants, including the collection Symphonia Armoni Celestium, Revelationum, Symphony of the Harmony of Celestial Revelations. Her music, soaring and mystical, often broke the traditional rules of plainchant, favoring wide intervals and expressive flourishes that reflected her visions. You didn't write like the monks. You wrote like someone who saw stars, and maybe that's why your music endures. It doesn't ask the listener to kneel, it invites them to rise, to stretch, to open the windows of their soul and let the light in. One of the younger sisters brings you a sprig of flowering marjoram. For the headache, she says, tucking it into the folds of your sleeve like it's a blessing disguised as a plant. You smile, because you remember the days when you were the one gathering the herbs, when your fingers stained green and your knees stayed dirty and your ideas were bigger than your voice. You've written about so many of these plants, the ones that calm, the ones that heat, the ones that purge or soothe or protect or simply smell like kindness. You've watched the world forget these things, and so you write them down. Your herbal compendium physica grows slowly, leaf by leaf. The pages are filled with careful drawings, poetic observations, odd digressions about the soul of garlic or the courage of valerian root. Some entries read more like hymns than recipes, but that's the point. You don't separate the sacred from the physical. Never have. Because what is health if not balance? And what is medicine if not mercy made tangible? Quirky detail. You once described the walnut as a symbol of the human mind, a green shell for the skull, a hard shell for the bone, and the nut meat inside for the brain. Your metaphors sometimes outnumber your measurements, but nobody seems to mind. Scholars still argue whether your medical writings were more mystical than practical, whether they reflect true empirical knowledge or a symbolic worldview shaped by vision. Some see them as folklore, others see early science wrapped in poetry, but none deny their influence. You teach the sisters how to boil wormwood into tinctures, how to grind mustard seed into warming poultices, how to recognize when a patient needs a salve or just a song. Because healing, you tell them, is not a checklist. It's a conversation. You've treated soldiers and stonemasons, noblewomen and novices, and always your first question is the same. What have you felt? Not just in the body, in the spirit, in the breath that moves between the two. You believe that every illness is a message, not a punishment, not a curse, just a signal that something has wandered off rhythm. And so your job, your joy, is to help find the tune again, to lead them gently back to harmony. Your herbal manuscripts become prized among neighboring abbeys. Monks send requests. Local midwives copy your recipes. Travelers whisper your remedies like spells, though you always remind them it's not magic. It's attention. That's the true root of healing. You finish your cup and rise slowly. Your back cracks in 3 places. You wince, but also laugh. Too much writing, you tell the closest sister. Not enough time. She gets the joke. Barely. The afternoon light filters through the fig leaves like gold dust. You walk the garden path one more time, pausing beside the lemon verbena. The scent is memory. The air is music. You glance toward the horizon, not toward the world's edge, but toward its breath. Because this garden, it isn't just a patch of dirt with plants. It's a mirror of creation, of care, of you. You bend and pluck a sprig of lavender, place it behind your ear, and whisper a prayer not for yourself, but for the sisters who will tend this soil when your hands are no longer able. You've planted more than herbs here. You've planted rhythm, and it will grow. You don't wake easily anymore. But when you do, it's always the same light first, then breath, then memory. Today the light is soft. It filters through the old abbey windows and fractured diamonds, catching the dust in ways that make you think of stardust and beginnings. You blink once, twice, and stretch your fingers. They move slower now, less like birds, more like roots. You're still here. And outside, the sisters are already singing. Their voices rise in layers not quite polished, not quite perfect, but earnest, like they're still trying to reach something higher than the rafters. You taught them that, remember. That song wasn't for showing off. It was for aligning the breath with the divine, with the rhythm of the world, with each other. You sit up slowly. A shawl slips from your shoulders. You leave it. The morning air is crisp enough to make you shiver, but not enough to stop you. You've lived through colder winds. A young novice enters quietly, holding a wooden tray. Bread soft, cheese, a fig cut in quarters. A cup of warm barley milk steeped with cinnamon and sage. She bows slightly. They said you might be hungry. You smile. You're always hungry for one more story. Mainstream historical fact, Hildegard lived to her early 80s, an impressive lifespan for the 12th century, especially for a woman who worked, wrote, traveled, and led communities through plague and upheaval. Her later years were filled with as much output as her middle ones, including a massive theological treatise, her final songs, and fiery letters to bishops, popes, and even emperors. You eat the fig first. Sweet, sticky, familiar. The cheese is cool and crumbly, the bread still warm from the oven, and the drink like liquid dusk, earthy and spiced and kind. You taste it all slowly. You've earned the slowness. The abbey has changed under your care. It hums more than it chants now. The gardens are fuller, the scriptoria busier, the sisters more confident. They debate you now, and that's how you know they've grown. They challenge the way you arrange herbs, question your poetic metaphors, correct your Latin. You love it because they aren't just learning your teachings, they're becoming their own voices. And your voice. It's thinner now, but still sharp, like a reed flute that's seen too many winters but never lost its tune. You still write, not every day, not in long stretches, but often enough. Letters, prayers, fragments of songs, and visions. The visions never left you. In fact, they've grown clearer. Sometimes you think you see colors that haven't been invented yet. Hear harmonies that no choir could sing. You try to write them down, sketch them, hum them, but they're slippery like dreams half remembered on waking. Still you try. Quirky detail. One of your final visions was said to include a living light, shaped like an egg spinning with rivers of flame and rain, inside which sat a figure made of crystal who sang without moving her lips. Sounds weird now. Probably sounded weird then, but your scribe recorded it anyway, and the bishop sent thanks. Historians still argue whether your visions were divine neurological or artistic genius, filtered through a mystical framework. Some believe you suffered from migraines or epilepsy. Others insist you accessed a deep spiritual current few could touch. You've heard all the theories. You smile at them. The truth is simpler. You listened to the world until it sang back. You finish your tea. The novice returns and takes the tray. She asks if you'd like the Psalms read aloud, and you nod. She reads softly, stumbling once, then correcting herself with a nervous laugh. You laugh too, then correct her pronunciation, not unkindly. You rest a while. In your dreams, you walk through a garden made of stars. The plants shimmer. The birds speak in poetry. And at the center, there's a stone basin filled with light. You dip your hand in. It feels like music. You wake again. The abbess sits beside you now. Not young, but not as old as you. She holds your last manuscript in her lap. It's bound in green cloth. She says, "We're ready to finish it if you are." You close your eyes for a moment, then nod. She reads the final paragraph aloud. It's about breath, about how life begins and ends with it, about how every moment between is a chance to align yourself again and again with purpose, with beauty, with the divine rhythm. You approve. And outside the window, a breeze lifts the lavender stems and carries their scent across the sill. You lean your head against the pillow. You can still smell the ink on your fingers, the sage on your shawl, the fig on your breath. You don't know if this is your last morning, but if it is, it's enough. Because you've sung, you've planted, you've healed, and the sisters will carry it forwards, not just your words, but your rhythm. The way you stirred barley into milk, the way you broke bread with strangers, the way you lit every dawn like it was sacred. Because it was. The bells don't toll for you. Not yet. But they do chime for the hour, and that's enough. Low and layered like warm brass stretching over the fields. They call the sisters to mid-morning prayers, but they don't rush. Not here. Not now. They move like petals unfolding gentle, steady in tune, with something older than clocks. You sit in the window alcove, wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of thyme. Outside, the sky is all mist and light, the kind of weather that makes the world look softer at the edges. A single blackbird hops along the garden wall, eyeing a worm like it's debating ethics. You smile. There's always time for small joys. Your knees ache today, but you let them. Pain is part of presence. You run your fingers along the edge of your last herbal, the one where you drew comfrey with curling leaves and wrote notes in the margins. Sleep balm, bone balm, soul balm. You never finished the entry for feverfew. No matter, someone else will. Mainstream historical fact, Hildegard's final years were spent not in retreat, but in refinement. She continued writing music letters, theological meditations, and her famed medical and botanical works texts that would survive long after the abbey quieted, studied by physicians, monks, midwives, and scholars centuries later. A young nun enters barefoot and flushed from the morning cold. She carries a basket of herbs and a look that says she's been caught singing to herself again. You wave her in. She places a jar of honey and some sprigs of lemon balm on the sill, saying, "They're for your tea." She asks if she can copy your old fever remedy into her own notes. You nod. Then you whisper, "Add a line about laughter." She blinks. Laughter cures more than mint, you say. She smiles wide and writes it down. Outside, two sisters are kneeling by the garden beds, brushing snow from the cabbages. Another sets a pot near the fire and tosses in fennel seeds with a flourish that would make you proud. In the distance, a shepherd's dog barks twice, then hushes. The world keeps going. Quirky detail. A tale survives, perhaps real, perhaps embroidered, that you once refused to have a nobleman buried in your abbey cemetery because he died excommunicated. When local clergy protested, you sent back a letter so stern, so poetic, and so theologically airtight that they had no choice but to yield. Then you wrote a hymn about mercy and sang it in the chapel that evening. Historians still argue whether you were more prophet, preacher, healer, or poet. Some say your impact was spiritual, others medicinal. Some call you Europe's first true female composer. Some call you a mystic doctor, but you always just called yourself a feather on the breath of God. You hear it again now. Not the phrase, the breath. It moves through the garden, lifts the leaves, flickers the flame, whispers through the bones of the abbey like a memory with good posture. You know it's close. Not death. Not yet. But something. A page turning. You take your spoonfuls of porridge. Sip your herb-steeped barley water. Your lips move in rhythm, not a prayer exactly, not a song, but something that belongs between. You lean back against the window stone and let your thoughts drift. You remember the hill where you saw your first vision, the light pulsing through the sky like the edge of language. You remember Chuta, her stern silence, her secret gentleness. You remember writing by candlelight, copying words faster than your hand could keep up. because the visions came like waves, and you didn't want to drown in them. You remember laughing over overcooked lentils. You remember crying over stubborn bishops. You remember healing a child with thyme and a kiss to the forehead. You remember every sister who fell asleep beside you, trusting the morning to arrive. And you remember the spiral, always the spiral, carved into a stone, painted into a margin, written into your songs, not a symbol, a structure. Life didn't move in lines. It curved, it returned, it sang in circles. You place your hand on your heart, feel its rhythm, steady, willing, a little tired. The nun brings you your tea, sweet, warm, soft, with orange peel and something floral. She sits beside you. You share a sip, share a silence. Then she asks the question, "What should I write if I finish your book, you consider it?" Then say simply, "Say it's a garden, not a rule." She nods. That's enough. The rest will come. And now, before the lamps are lit, before the shadows lean in for sleep, let's slow everything down. Let your breath soften. Let your body settle. Imagine yourself back in that stone alcove with a warm cup in your hands and the scent of lemon balm in the air. The abbey walls hold the silence like a lullaby. The sky outside fades into candlelight. And the world, for once, isn't asking anything of you. It's just holding you. You hear soft footsteps in the hallway. A hymn sung low. A door creaks, then closes again. There's no rush, no worry, only the slow unfolding of breath and story, like a scroll unrolling in the quiet. You've walked with Hildegard across decades through visions and letters, gardens and dreams, music and firelight. You've seen how one woman with a stubborn spirit and ink-stained fingers shaped her world gently but unmistakably, not with armies, but with herbs and harmony. And now, as the spiral turns to sleep, you carry a little of that rhythm with you. The rhythm of care, of listening, of writing things down before they vanish. So, rest easy. The fig trees still sway. The spiral still turns. And the dawn will rise again, slow and golden. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Maybe by now you've already drifted off to sleep, and if so, we hope this story brought you peace of mind and helped you rest a little easier. Deep sleep makes life better, and we're truly happy to be part of that. Until next time, sweet dreams.